Now that we've determined a topic for our research project, we are ready to begin conducting academic research. So most of the research we'll be doing this semester is inductive reasoning. We're going to be collecting data and then observing the data, analyzing the data to arrive at essentially a thesis, at which time then we'll be ready to draft an argument. There are really two types of research. The first is the primary research, which is research we conduct ourselves. So if we do surveys, if we do interviews, if we do case studies, if we have to go out and survey a site physically, this is conducting primary research. This is what scientists do in a lab. For this, our first draft of our research project, we will only be conducting secondary research, which is when we are reading, collecting, and analyzing the research articles that others have written. And so one of the things that often confuses students once they choose their topic is they immediately try to make a Memphis focus. All of the research in the first draft does not have to be Memphis focused. So if you're working on, say, the topic of education and education reform, you're not going to be able to find the 5 academic resources necessary for the draft that is focused on Memphis. And so what we'll do is we will collect general information. It's in the revision process that we'll be conducting and adding primary research where we make that Memphis connection. So I just want to clarify, your first draft does not have to make a Memphis connection because this will be much harder to do with the required academic and government sources necessary. If you can do so, please do, but it is not required for this draft. In order to help us clarify our thinking and focus our attention, we are asking you to write a research proposal this week. And the guidelines for writing a research proposal can be found in week 6. We're asking you to use that format in which you provide a brief introduction of how you were made aware of the problem. Then you give us a problem research question. You might ask yourself, why does Memphis historically have a high crime rate? That's a question that we can then go out and collect research on, analyze the research, determine an answer, and then argue that. You're going to give us any information that you already know about the issue, right? You can do this in a bulleted list. But then you want to make a list of the questions that you'll need to answer that larger question. So what kinds of crime is Memphis prone to? What are the ages of the perpetrator? Where do the crimes take place? What are the smaller questions that we need to answer in order to understand that larger research question that we have? We want to list any resources you've already identified: books, journals, articles, make an MLA works cited list. And then, even though we will not be conducting primary research until the revision process, you might want to just begin thinking about who would you need to talk to, how might you be able to conduct surveys, etc., that might aid you in your Memphis focused research. Many students, when they're asked to do a research project, turn to Google rather than understanding library databases. And so we really want to stop and think about what information is about. We've had a lot of conversation in our public discourse about fake news, and this is in fact a big problem for our culture. And so when we do a search and we do it through Google, we're going to get returned all kinds of information from unreliable resources. What the databases through a library do is they essentially tell us that these sources have been vetted or evaluated for reliability and credibility. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be problems with some things found in the database, but for the most part, we know that we can trust things from a database. What are databases? Databases are large collections of articles that have been published generally by researchers, but also by popular magazines and newspapers that have been collected into a storage unit, virtual of course, but then people, libraries, have to pay a subscription to allow students access. And so again, this just means that there's someone evaluating the resources so that we don't have to be as worried about whether or not we are looking at fake information. And so we ask that you find at least 5 academic and or government resources for this your first draft utilizing the databases at the university library. We do utilize Google when we conduct research, and one of the things that we really need to pay attention to is the URLs. Because as I've stated, you're required to utilize 5 academic and or government resources. And the largest collection of research information is collected by the United States government in its portal usa.gov. And if you think about it, there's a Department of Education, a Department of Labor, a Department of Health. All of these departments conduct and collect research. And so I encourage you to search usa.gov for your topic so that you will see what research, for instance, the National Institute of Health or the Department of Education might have. When you use Google or popular resources, you have to be much more suspicious and you have to do a lot more evaluating just to try and determine where the information comes from. So we want to look at .com. Com actually means commercial. So people are utilizing commercial sites when they're generally trying to persuade us to buy things. .org means that these are organization, nonprofit sites, and remember, they are always going to be biased. Now, bias is not a problem unless someone tries to hide that bias. So, for instance, we know that Mothers Against Drunk Driving are biased against drunk drivers. But the biggest problem with most websites is that we don't know who is actually giving us the information. And so be sure if you're utilizing online information that you are hitting that about button and trying to determine who you're getting information from. So we're going to be talking about university databases generally, but there are also, again, some general resources that you can use in addition to those 5 academic and or government resources you have to use. So if you're working on something about education or college, you might try doing a search at the University of Memphis homepage. Remember, this is a research institution and we have a lot of resources here. Um, since we're trying to think about and make connections and work on topics about Memphis, you might hit the City of Memphis homepage. Again, usa.gov is highly recommended that you do a search there so that you can see what the government resources are. But you can also use those news outlet and magazines like CNN, BBC, Newsweek, Time, ESPN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. However, please be aware that Fox News, whatever your political leanings, Fox News is a very suspect site. And if you use it, your credibility will be questioned. So some tips to remember. Again, this is one of the biggest problems we have with students is they do not include in their essay references from 5 academic and or government sources. This means you can use 3 academic articles and 2 government sources or vice versa, but you must use some combination of 5 academic and government sources in your research draft. You may then use additional popular sources, but again, these are in addition to those 5 resources. Be sure to ask for help to make sure that you collect your articles in a timely manner. You want to get that knocked out pretty quickly because the longest portion of the research time will be taken up by analyzing those articles. Once you've collected the data, you then have to read and understand it and collate that information. Be sure to use the English 1020 library guide to aid you, as well as the chat with a librarian on the library homepage. And of course, you're always welcome to contact me for additional help. Once you've completed this video, please watch the Searching the Databases that you'll find immediately under this link.